Climate change has a really important aspect, especially in Latin America, given the disparities in economies, the lack of resources, informal housing, poverty. So there's a lot of issues that make these communities really vulnerable to climate change, especially in peri-urban areas and in cities. So one of the benefits of green infrastructure in mitigating the effects of climate change are that these natural systems, a lot of the vegetation, soils, can do a lot of the same services and have a lot of the same objectives as a lot of expensive engineering-based approaches. And this is especially important in resource-poor communities. So for example, with landslides, floodings, a lot of them are actually caused by deforestation, by poor land management. So I think green infrastructure is a very low expensive, very efficient, cost-effective way of mitigating some of these damages. So trying to convince people or communities about the importance of green infrastructures is a very complex approach, because you need to convince all sectors of society. So through science, communication, education, you need to convince policymakers, decision makers, citizens, everybody. This is a really important problem. So as far as the progress of implementing green infrastructure, I think there's a couple of success stories. For example, in Curitiba, in Brazil, it's a very green environmental city, Medellin. But in the other extremes, there's a lot of vulnerable communities in other cities that are vulnerable to these types of changes. Last week in Mocoa, in Colombia, over 300 people were killed, probably as a combination of not only climate change, but poor land management practices, deforestation. So all these factors really play a role in these vulnerable communities. I think one of the ways that we can make people take into consideration this green infrastructure is talking to them in their own language, whether it's engineers and trying to communicate the cost effectiveness of these practices, whether it's land planners integrating these green aspects into cities, or it's the citizens telling them that they can use less energy, have clean water, or other sectors of the society telling them of the importance of biodiversity. So I think it's a very multifaceted approach you have to take to convince people about the importance of green infrastructure. But at the end, when you convince them, I think it's a very long-term message. So I think often this green infrastructure is often a metaphor we use to communicate to people. So with engineers, we talk about reduced flooding. With managers, we talked about improved cost. With biologists, we talk about corridors. So I think this term of green infrastructure is more of a concept, a way of educating people. And I think in 20 years, these terms we use will change. But what's important is the message of conserving, preserving, and working with nature to solve a lot of these impacts from climate change.